Welcome to the Organ Podcast from the Royal College of Organists with me, Mark O'Brien. Coming up, I get a fabulous musical tour of the organ at York Minster with its Director of Music, Robert Sharpe.
We were aware from listening to recordings from the 1950s that some of the larger, more dramatic elements of the organ, as introduced by Bairstow with Arthur Harrison's involvement, we realised that actually it would be possible to reinstate those things, almost like an historic restoration of 1931.
I find out what impact the RCO is making with its programme of loaning Viscount organs to state schools.
Once a week I have a lesson here. It's just been really great because if there was no organ here, then I wouldn't be able to have any lessons.
And I talked to Wayne Marshall about his path to the organ, conducting, improvising, and some of the influences that have shaped his unique musical style.
When I was probably about 16, 17, I heard some music of Stevie Wonder. Then I started to get into the 70s disco thing, with all this kind of music and Earth, Wind and Fire. And, this sound world, I just absorbed it all.
From 2018 to 2021, the organ at York Minster underwent a massive restoration, described by the Minster's Director of Music, Robert Sharpe, as a once-in-a-century reconstruction. This organ has evolved from an instrument built in the 1830s by Elliott and Hill to a new organ in 1903 by Walkers, which was then transformed under the partnership of Arthur Harrison and Sir Edward Bairstow. It was under their hands that so many significant and far-reaching changes were made from 1916 to 1931. And it's looking back to that golden age that inspired Robert Sharpe, along with Harrison and Harrison, when approaching the last reconstruction, which was completed just 3 years ago. Well, I met Robert at the Nave console, where he demonstrated some of the astonishing results that they've achieved. When you are Director of Music at York Minster, does it take a bit of a nerve to get up and say, right, I'm going to rebuild the organ, restore the organ, and I want it to sound like this?
Yeah, very good question. And obviously the work we've done recently has involved a little bit of reversal of things done by my predecessors, notably the 1960 work. I think what we had to do, and I would encourage anyone to do with an organ project of this scale, is to take a long time thinking about what's needed and what will work, and not rushing, and being very careful to be certain about things and understand why you're making the decisions you are, so that the whole thing is a disciplined exercise rather than just a vanity project.
What were your priorities? What did, after that time, you thought needed to be done? Because presumably it wasn't on its last legs mechanically and things. What was your thinking to initiate this rebuild?
We were aware that obviously the organ was becoming more tired mechanically, though as you say it wasn't on its last legs, but we wanted to make sure that we weren't in a situation that it would be on its last legs, and we had to resort to having an electronic organ for a number of years. So that's why we acted when we did. But we were aware from looking at and listening to recordings from the 1950s that some of the larger, more dramatic elements of the organ, as introduced by Bairstow with Arthur Harrison's involvement in 1916 and then culminating in the work in 1931, which had been lost with the fashions of the time in 1960, were actually rather magnificent. And with various experiments and careful thinking, we realised that actually it would be possible to reinstate those things, almost like an historic restoration of 1931, without compromising the original material at all, and in fact very much enhancing that. And that was the direction of travel we decided to take.
I mean, in a sense, an extraordinary duo, Arthur Harrison and Sir Edward Bairstow. You can't get more English cathedral than that, really.
No, and they were, of course, very good friends. Bairstow had Harrison come and look at the organ in 1913, just after he'd taken over from Noble, and plans were made very early on to re-devise the way the great chorus worked and the larger reeds on the great, in order to give the organ the extra elan really needed for such a large space, and that was completed in effect in 1931.
One of the things the organ builders have had to battle with is perhaps its situation. You're right under the main tower, so a lot of the sound of this organ, it goes straight up before it comes straight out. And is that something that you were then hoping to grapple with finally when you started this?
Yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, the organ is serving almost like two separate spaces, with the eastern side with the choir where the daily services take place, where there's no issue with travel of sound. And then to the west there is the great lantern over the top of the crossing where the organ screen is, which can absorb sound. And one of the significant things additional to the 1931 vision was to incorporate shutters on the western side of the swell box. The original shutters are on the southern side, which gave a beautiful breadth of sound both to the east and the west from the famous swell division. Very good for accompanying the choir because it's not too direct. But by incorporating shutters on the west side of the swell box, we were able to make the pipes in the swell play to much better advantage when heard in the nave, whilst at the same time when they're heard in the choir they're totally as they always sounded. And it makes you realise quite how much noise is being produced from these pipes in the box, which was just being lost by the virtue of the fact there are only southern shutters. So just a quick demonstration of the swell. I'll just do 8 and 4 foot diapasons. This is them without the west shutters engaged, just played with the box open here in the nave at the nave console. Then I'll just engage the new west shutters and play exactly the same thing again.
I mean, that's extraordinary. That's really noticeable.
Very noticeable. And then if I just do the same thing with the full swell, so this is basically the famous York full swell sound, which is quite a gripping sound.
Why is it famous? Give me the character of that.
It's quite dark because of the Walker reeds, so it's very possible to build up bringing in the reeds quite early in the upper work, slightly later than the reeds, so you have a very covered sound. But actually with the west shutters it's taken some of the darkness away, so you've got a choice. So here it is without the west shutters. Then if I just bring the west shutters back in, and then you'll hear when I open the box there's much more drama, less darkness, but still the same sound. And that sound is really, it really goes down the building with no effort at all now. It's like having a kind of reflector behind the sound of the swell.
And am I right in thinking then actually a lot of your priority was in terms of the direction of traffic of sound into the nave rather than in the accompanimental role of the choir, the other side of the screen?
Yes, and we knew that the organ could do all that was needed in the choir, and we also knew that because the building is not used as one ever, it's only either services in the choir or they're in the nave. You don't have a situation where if you're playing for a nave service, those who are in the choir are going to be deafened. So we have effectively enhanced the organ's big capabilities back to as Harrison and Bairstow designed them to be, plus the west shutters. In the 1960 work, when the great chorus pressures had been reduced and the large diapason taken away, it was possible to use more of the great behind the choir. Now you have to use a little bit less, but that's no disadvantage because, of course, the swell and choir divisions are as they always were. What we've gained is the ability to go many stages further when the nave side of the building is in use.
When you're talking there of the work in the 1960s, this is work initiated by your predecessor, Sir Francis Jackson, and it chimed very much with the fashion of that time. We're in the area of the organ reform movement, so lightening the sound, reducing it in order to make it more acceptable for how people thought Baroque style music was to be played. Now, Sir Francis lived to a ripe old age of 104, I think, and was well aware of what you were doing when you were embarking on the reconstruction in 2018. I mean, was there a gentle eyebrow raised at you effectively dismantling his work?
That's a very good question. And obviously, when we were first planning it and he was a little bit younger, it was a difficult thing to kind of contemplate how we would discuss it. But he was an absolute gentleman all the way through, as you'd expect. In fact, the wonderful thing was that his very last visit to the Minster while he was still alive, which I think was in June 2021. So the organ was finished and we had a private visit, just three of us here, including Francis. And he was able to hear it sitting in a wheelchair for some of it, but also out and about for some of it as well, and gave it his wholehearted seal of approval, which was a wonderful moment. There's a photograph of him and me on the console. And the next time he was in the building was for his funeral the following February, which was a most moving occasion.
It was marvellous for you that he saw your vision of the organ, and he heard it at its best.
Yes, and it's important to remember, I think, that although the changes have been far-reaching, and as they were in 1960, on both occasions, not that much was actually changed.
But has Harrison's, who did your reconstruction, they added a few new stops though, didn't they? Am I right in thinking the new open number one?
That's right,
diapason? Yeah. I mean, in many ways, is the open number one diapason for you the really important stop on this organ that gives it a lot of its unique character?
Yeah, I think the place of the large open on the English great has been very much misunderstood by English organists from the organ reform movement, and it's only really in the last 10 years or so that it's been properly appreciated what these stops were designed to do. And of course, if you use a big leathered diapason in a piece of polyphony, an average 3-manual Arthur Harrison organ in a big parish church, for example, with the big great diapason, it can sound very cloying. And what happens though when you take that key element away from the organ is that the whole overall warmth of the sound and the way the chorus locks together ceases to make sense in the way that Harrison intended. And this was the case here. So in 1960, very much in the fashion of that day, the large open was actually taken away from the great and moved to make a principal and 15th in the pedal. And we decided it was critical to the success of the reconstruction that element was put back. So Harrison's made their first leathered number one high pressure open diapason for maybe 60 years or so.
Gosh,
and it's been a
and
key
what
element.
pressure is this on?
So the chorus with the number one open and the octave and super octave and the mixture 3 ranks and the 5 rank mixture, all of those stops are on 7-inch pressure, which sounds very high, but of course in a building this size it's not.
Can we hear it?
We can, yeah.
Let's go for it.
I'll play the 3 diapasons without it, so number 2, 3 and 4 together, so you can hear the original effect, and then I'll add in the number 1. So hear the 2, 3 and 4, which is what we had as 1, 2 and 3 before. And then we add in the newly reinstated number 1 open.
It is an extraordinary sound. I mean, it's unique here, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And what's interesting is when you use it with the great chorus on the nave side, we don't tend to use it in the choir where it's not really needed, but on the nave side, if you use it with the great chorus in a hymn, for example, then you push it in, the whole chorus sound is affected. It's not just the 8-foot line, it's the whole way the overtones from it kind of support
kind
the
of
stops
carries.
above. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, can you give us a bit on, up to the new 5-rank mixer that Harrison's did for you?
Yeah,
Go
so
up to the great chorus.
So this is
please.
the stops you've just heard, including the number 1 open with the upper work above up to the 5-rank mixture. It's quite a significant sound.
And of course, the reeds here are important. I mean, you've got post songs on the great, and then trombas as well. And am I right in thinking the trombas are the kind of the Arthur Harrison signature here?
Yes, Arthur Harrison introduced trombas in the great of his moderate size 3 manuals upwards, often just 8 and 4, which did double duty as tubas by being transferable to the choir manual. In his larger organs, they varied in their style from the very smooth, such as you might hear at King's College, Cambridge, to the more flamboyant style. We know that Bairstow had very much wanted that latter style here in York, which matches, of course, with this enormous church. And so with the trombas, the reinstated trombas here, the voicing very much goes down those lines. Here's the 8-foot tromba alone first, and then I add the 4, so you can hear the 2 together.
So those are your 8 and 4 trombas on the grate. I mean, if I just walked in here now, I would think that was your tuba.
Yeah,
I'm quite terrified to think actually what your tuba is when we get there.
We have 3 tubas before we get to this, but the interesting thing is that the trombas are double duty stops. So in ordinary service playing in the choir, they are really the tubas. So if you want to play the tuba solo in Stamford in A Not Limited, for example, you may well go for the tromba, and you can play them by transfers from both the choir manual and the solo manual, so you can use them with the grate at the same time, even though they're on the same division. And that use of them is actually significantly more important than the tutti use, because we've got the smaller grate reeds as well first, which you might describe as the normal grate reed.
Give me just a quick of the post songs. So that's these are your normal
the
chorus.
normal ones. Yeah, so here's the 8 and the 16. We completed that family by adding a clarion, just so that there was an independent set of great reeds without the trombas. So
it is more respectful, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. Yes. So here's the clarion as well. And then the trombas are coming above. What we have also, though, is on the solo manual is 2 enclosed tuba stops, 16 and 8, which are inside the solo box. And they, in the choir particularly, they project very, very well. But they can be used in a variety of different ways, almost like orchestral trombones. So you can go quite quiet with them as solo sounds and colour sounds. You can also couple them through to the grate and use the solo pedal to kind of bring them out. And they form quite an interesting sound, as you can hear them against the bells of the Minster now.
Yes.
So here's the 8-foot. This
and
is
these
from,
speak into the choir.
They come out of the side of the organ, so they go well into the choir and into the nave. We're here at the nave console, so we're hearing it from that perspective, really. So here's the 8-foot of that from the nave console.
8-foot tuba.
8-foot tuba, yeah. You can hear, not unlike the tromba, but a slightly more covered sound. The 16-foot on its own has open shallots and is actually quite bright, almost like an orchestral trumpet. And it's independent pipes from the 8, so they're not a unit, they are separate. So because of that slightly brighter sound at the 16-foot pitch, when the two are used together, it's quite a gripping sound. I'll just shut the solo box first and then open it.
I mean, it's extraordinary, only 2 stops. I mean, you're filling the building.
Yeah, it's very useful having those ranks, and they can be used, the 8-foot can be used against relatively soft swell as a solo sound. I'll just very quickly demonstrate that. So this is just the swell foundations.
With a tuba?
And a tuba solo with the box closed.
And that's extraordinary.
Yes.
I mean, that really is. I thought, what are you doing? But
Yeah.
I mean, that's a beautiful sound.
Absolutely, and when you use them underneath the larger grate sound, it's like having as I said, orchestral trombones just able to come and colour in and out. It's very, very much part of the York sound. And then the beautiful flute sounds. And then the way the west shutters allow the swell to be a solo division.
So this is you're accompanying the swell on the grate.
Yeah. And then the horn.
You can easily get lost here. Spend hours just playing.
You can interchange the solo and grate when you're in the nave and use the swell more as a solo division because of the west shutters. And so even things like the flute stops on the swell really project in the nave.
I mean, really, those swell shutters, I mean, it's given the organ a new lease of life. I mean, these are things, this is something you couldn't have done 4 years ago.
And then even things like this.
So we're all strings, swell and solo.
Yeah. And that will then go through to
the great. I mean, one thing we haven't spoken about really on the pedals, you've got the oldest, well, you've got the first metal 32-foot stop in the country, dating from 18...
It's early 1830s, so we often say 1832, it's not exactly known, but...
Yeah. But those are your older stops.
They are, and the 32-foot wood on the other side. Originally much wider scale than it is now, a colossal scale. And when Hill reconstructed Camage's organ in 1859 and made a more conventional C compass organ, he rescaled the 32-foot flue to enable the bottom C to be what was originally the bottom A. So he took the A pipe and lengthened it to 32 to create a more moderate scale, which is still here to this day. The ophicleide was added to the pedals in 1931 to complete the scheme that Bairstow had started in 1916 with the bigger great chorus and reeds. It was felt that a bigger pedal reed would enhance this, and in order to do this, Harrison added the pedal ophicleide on 25 inches pressure, the same as the tuba mirabilis, extended to 8 and 4, and in 1960 it was totally tamed right down with new reed tongues and put onto 6 inches pressure, and sounded like a normal pedal reed. And what we've done in the recent work is to reinstate the ophicleide back on its original pressure,
which is
25 inches.
So you're going to play a 25-inch
pedal reed. Yes, lots of noise under your shoes. Again, like the great reed, it's quite a flamboyant sound. And then with the 8-foot and then the 4, here's the 8 added. And the 4. And then we have the original Walker trombones, which are wooden, 16 and 32.
Wooden 32?
Yeah, it's a very dark sound. And with 32 as well. Almost like timpani, and you can use that stop under the swell quite easily out in the nave especially.
When you were doing this, and I suppose this is an issue for all cathedral organists when you have the opportunity to do something to the instrument, do you have to make compromises in terms of preserving its sole purpose of accompanying the choir over and above what people will also expect of it as a repertoire recital instrument? Can it do both? I know you're going to say yes, but honestly, is this always an area where you have to compromise?
I think because we've got quite a large instrument here and it's in a very open position in the middle of a big building, the answer is no. You don't have to compromise. There are organs where the voicing has to be kept back a little bit in order not to overwhelm a choir.
But if you're doing the Baroque, I mean, it's interesting. So if you're going to play Bach on this is, I suppose, an issue with a lot of cathedral organs, big romantic organs like this, is that you still have to reduce its scale to get the clarity. It's difficult to get that full-sounding plenum, is it, with playing Bach here? Or can you actually do that?
You have a choice, really. You can do that. If you're wanting to play a Bach plenum sound that fills the whole nave, if we wanted to play something like the St. Anne Fugue at the end of a big formal service, you can do that, but you have to be careful with your tempos for clarity's terms. You can use a smaller plenum in the choir, which you wouldn't think of as being smaller when you hear it, but when you're up, because you're in a different part of the building, and play very clearly, so no issues there. Or you can, of course, make the decision to play your Bach in a way which is affected by the style of the organ, so in a more romantic tradition.
And do you think we need to get a grip with that? that in a sense? Because I wonder, I'm probably guilty of this, of perhaps defining instruments like this by what they can't do, rather than really we should be marvelling at its liturgical use, its accompanimental role, which, fair enough, is often the envy of people all over the world who come to hear that English cathedral sound.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. And I think it's particularly the case when you have a smaller parish organ where there might be what seem to be limited resources, but the voicing is very, very good. And, people will say, well, it's difficult to play the Vidal toccata at a wedding on it. But of course, it was never designed to do that. And when you approach those instruments on their own terms, you can do a lot more with them. Here, you can play pretty much everything because of the scale of the instrument, but it is very much more rewarding to think about these great romantic organs in the spirit in which they were conceived, rather than trying to superimpose your own ideas on top of them.
Well, one thing we haven't heard yet, we've been talking about tubas earlier, but the star of the show, the tuba mirabilis, could we, in true organ bore fashion, just have a blast of that?
I should explain how this came about. Bairstow was keen to have a stop which would step over the tower space to lead congregational singing, so in single notes you can bring a congregation together. So an actual trumpeter was asked to stand in the organ at different points without any health and safety considerations to play his instrument, to gauge where it would be best to put the pipes. And then the eventual position chosen was just above the stone parapet on this western side of the screen. And the pipes are, the tubes of the pipes are horizontal in what you might call en chamade fashion.
Oh, right.
But they're not en V, they're just receded back. But the pipes themselves, the boots and the reed pipes, are actually upright. But that gives an enormous projection of sound down the nave. So here's just a few notes on it.
That's pretty distinctive.
Described by Francis Jackson as both wonderful and terrifying.
So to finish off, could you do a short improvisation of going from the quieter stops on the swell and then crescendoing through the entire instrument, if you could, ending up with the tuba mirabilis at some point at the end? Can we do that?
And I'll show some of the smaller tuba effects on the way too. We normally reckon that to do what you're asking takes about half an hour, so I'll try and do it as quickly as I can.
This is your challenge. You've got 1 minute and 57 seconds.
Okay.
But Robert, if we did that. Robert Sharpe, thank you ever so much. I mean, amazing, really fabulous. Thank you so much for doing this.
It's been a great pleasure to show you it.
Well, I wonder who might be the next generation of Robert Sharpes, capable of making that kind of incredible sound. whether it's in a church, cathedral, on the concert platform, or anywhere else where there's an eager audience for enjoyment. Well, helping to widen the opportunity for this is an initiative run by the Royal College of Organists to provide digital organs to state schools, with the aim of allowing children from all backgrounds to see, hear, and play an organ, often for the very first time. I went to meet staff and students at Queen Elizabeth School in Barnet in North London, who at the beginning of the academic year took delivery of a new Viscount organ provided by the RCO. And for the school's Director of Music, Ruth Partington, the organ has already had a significant impact on the musical foundation and opportunities at the school.
At Queen Elizabeth's we have a very rich musical heritage, and that includes a very formal and prestigious 9 lessons of carol service every Christmas, and again a very formal, very well attended Founders' Day every June. And the organ is an important part of both those services. So along with my mission to expand our orchestral instrument range, our ability to provide piano lessons, singing lessons, the organ seemed the next logical step, given that those 2 services are incredibly important to the school calendar. And it occurred that if we have these very capable pupils, we want to offer them the very best opportunities we can, then of course being able to learn and play the organ comes alongside that. We also want to prepare our pupils as best we can for their lives once they leave school. And many pupils every year apply to Oxbridge to study a whole range of subjects. And again, it seemed a natural progression that we encourage them to not only apply to read medicine, engineering, music too, of course, but that we also encourage them to apply for choral scholarships and, of course, organ scholarships. So with all those things in mind, it seemed, as I said, logical to try and encourage as many as possible to start learning the organ.
Having the organ in a school like this, have you noticed students are suddenly interested in taking up the organ as a musical instrument in its own right, just for fun, purely because they can see it's here?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's made a big difference. And certainly when it arrived, there was a real buzz about, oh, what is this amazing machine that suddenly appeared? And we had quite a few pupils coming to ask to play it just right there and then. And certainly the pupil body as a whole has had a lot more exposure to it, and being able to say to pupils, here is an organ, we've got one on site. If you want to have an organ lesson, just like you would have a clarinet lesson, a saxophone lesson, an oboe lesson, it's very much possible. It's right here. So yes, I think it has made a big impact having it here in this building.
Well, Jazz Hutchinson-Baisley, you're another music teacher here in the school. You're an organist yourself. What opportunities has having this instrument here enabled you to do?
Well, I think the exposure is definitely the main thing. Being able to present the organ to 200 people at a time who probably never heard the organ before. Also, being able to present performances on it so they can actually hear organ music. And when I do those assemblies, I'll often get a student along to play a piece, and so they can actually hear some organ repertoire. And again, they won't have ever really experienced this, probably, and some of them may, but the majority won't have. That's really, really valuable, I think.
Well, you've designed an organ club.
Yes, that's right. So I'm wary that even those with some musical experience might be completely bemused by the organ. So I have opened up this opportunity for pianists to come along to try the organ with minimal commitment. As long as they turn up and are willing, then that's fine by me. For a short amount of time anyway. It's like a group lesson. And so, I'll take turns on the bench and we can try things and try exercises and look at the stops and look at how it all works and play things together and see how it goes on. And then hopefully, if that sparks their enthusiasm, they might go on to take individual lessons and study it more formally.
But having an instrument here then on your doorstep has enabled you to foster links with the local church, is that right? You've got a scholarship unique to this school.
Yes, absolutely. I'm very keen to keep working on that. And so we have 2 organ scholars who are with us today, who we appointed as organ scholars there. The purpose of that is that they'll get a lot of really useful and valuable experience at the church. And the church have been wonderful in welcoming them and providing lots of opportunity for them. So it's wonderful preparation for them and a really great experience.
Well, let's talk to the most important people here. We've got Joel, Noah and Gabriel. Joel, you're one of the organ scholars at St John's, the local church here.
Yeah.
First of all, what made you want to play the organ?
From year 7 and seeing it in all the services we do and just looking at, all the buttons. I played the piano, but what do all the buttons do? Is it kind of the same as the piano? I was really interested in that. So it's always been something that I wanted to kind of look into more. And then, one day I decided to actually, look it up on YouTube. How does it work? And it seemed really interesting. So yeah, I talked to my parents, and it seemed like a good idea, and we could maybe try some organ lessons out, see how it was, and that ended up being really fun.
And you're actually working with the director of music in your local church. You do choir practices as well as playing the organ?
Yeah, so I come to do rehearsals with the choir, so often I'm helping to accompany them or conduct them.
And how does having an organ here, right in your school, help with all of that?
So I usually practice at my local church on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but sometimes I can't come in there it's a church, it's often used. So if I come in here in the mornings before school, I can get half an hour in on some days, and it's just really useful, especially if I have an exam or I need to really practice some pieces. Just come and sit down before school, it's nice and relaxing, and I can just get all my practice done.
Noah, you're in year 10. You're another scholar, so you work with Joel at church here. Where do you listen to organ music? What sort of inspires you in terms of finding out what you might want to play?
So I've been to a few organ concerts when I was a child, and more recently I often went to services and recitals at St Albans Cathedral, and also recently at St Paul's Cathedral. And even when I'm at home on YouTube, on Spotify, just taking in lots of repertoire, whether it's choral music or organ music. And I really enjoy just finding new things to listen to. And now with the organ, there's just such a huge variety of different styles and instruments that it's really fascinated me.
And how often do you practice on the organ here in this school?
I come here, once, twice a week at lunchtimes or after school, and when I'm bored at lunchtime, it's always good to just have somewhere to come to and do something useful and enjoyable. And especially having an instrument right here, it means it's sort of always accessible, and especially working on like pedal exercises is something you can't really do at home or in a practice room with a piano. So that's been really useful to me.
I mean, do you think you would be able to do the work that you're required to as the organ scholar and practice without having an organ here at your school?
I don't think so, because with the organ scholarship, there's a lot of hymns to practice, psalms, and
Hymns are difficult, aren't they?
very, and it's been a challenge sort of figuring out how to do it. I've had a lot of support, but still very difficult.
And you're using pedals with the hymns, you're not cheating and just doing hands only.
Yeah, I've started adding in the pedals recently, and that alongside all of my other repertoire for organ exams and organ lessons, it's a lot of repertoire to learn, a lot of things to practice. So I think without having the instrument here, I wouldn't be able to keep on top of all of my sort of requirements, as it were.
Well, Gabriel, now you're in year 7 and you've been playing the organ since, for about 5 months?
Yep, 2 terms ago I started playing the organ, and since then I've realised that it's a very complex and interesting instrument.
Do you have your lessons here on the organ we're standing right in front of in your school?
Yes, I do. Once a week I have a lesson here. It's just been really great, because if there was no organ here, then I wouldn't be able to have any lessons.
So none at all. So it's thanks to the organ here, the fact that you're playing the organ in the first place, really?
Yeah.
And what do you like about the organ? What's fun? When you come in here, when you're practicing or you're having a lesson, what's the thing that gives you most enjoyment?
The thing that gives me most enjoyment is like the complexity and the challenge of having something with multiple like hands and feet, and it's just a lot more complicated and a lot more challenging.
So it gives you something to think about.
Yeah.
And do you think you might take the organ professionally?
It depends. I'll see where I get later in my school life, and if I think that I can and want to continue, then maybe, yeah.
Well, guiding the students to help make that kind of decision is organ teacher Adam Hope. And the point of having an organ that is both accessible and available is crucial to his work and the learning opportunities for the pupils.
having it as a living, breathing part of a school, as a heartbeat of an assembly or an organ class or whatever it may be, interacting with other musical genres and traditions that it wouldn't be able to in a church. This is the way that the organ remains a relevant and exciting and living, breathing part of our musical tradition in the West.
From your point of view, can you still teach the basics of an organ? Because I know it's in conjunction with what two of the guys here do in a church on a real pipe organ, but here, are you still able to teach the fundamental basics of learning the art of registration and authentic tonal approaches to registering pieces?
Absolutely. I think the most fascinating thing that I see time and time again from new organ students who've come most of the time from the piano, nearly all of the time exclusively, is number one, how hard can I hit the key to make it sound louder? You can't. So that's the first major revelation. And the second major revelation is when you say to them, well, if you put an 8-foot stop on and you play middle C, you get the pitch. Add a 4-foot stop and you'd have to play 2 notes together an octave apart to get that on the piano. So absolutely, the foundations of organ playing, the non-legato touch, the legato, the staccato, those bread and butter elements of the organ technique, along with explaining to them the issues around dynamic and touch at the instrument and the combination of stops, they're all accessible. This is the perfect way to get started, and it's ideal for any new organ student to have that resource and opportunity.
Well, let's hear it. So I look at our 3 budding organ students here who are now panicking. Who's going to demonstrate? Who's got something to play? Who wants to give us a go? Right, Joel, what are you going to play?
I forgot my organ shoes.
You've got your organ shoes. You're playing in socks,
Yeah.
right? That you're opening a can of worms on that controversy, but we'll skate over that. So you're going to play
Prière à Notre Dame by Bernstein.
Oh, nice. Righty-ho. Yes, we need some good strings for this, I think, don't we?
Play the start.
Are you having to miss a lesson to come and do this?
Yes.
What are you missing?
Maths.
See, there's an advantage to playing the organ already.
Essentially.
Well, if you're in the UK and interested in having a digital organ for your school, then you can find all the details on the RCO website. Now, Wayne Marshall, OBE, is perhaps a tricky person to try and define, because he's just as famous as a conductor and a pianist as he is an organist. And quite often, he manages to do all 3 of those things at the same time on the same concert platform. He's famous around the world for his virtuosic flair and interpretations of Gershwin, Bernstein, and other 20th century composers. For many years, his home has been in Malta, but he's currently back living in the UK, which meant I could go and meet him and talk about his extraordinary musical life. So I guess with you, you're able to trace back to an event that essentially created Wayne Marshall to a Wednesday morning in 1969.
I can indeed, and I remember it like as if it was yesterday. No, I mean, it was at my first school in Oldham. I was born in Oldham, and I used to attend the church, the local church, All Saints Northmoor, which is literally right across the street from where we lived. My parents were both in the choir, and of course we used to go to church every Sunday as well, so that was what was required on a Sunday. So anyway, every Christmas the school had a carol service in the church. And this particular Christmas carol service, the music teacher asked me to go and give a chord in the organ. I walked up to the organ, and as we can say, the rest is history. I played this G major chord, and that was it.
It just took a G major chord on your church organ, and bam.
One G major chord, that was it. I mean, the biggest problem then was getting me away from the organ after that. I mean, I stayed there, obviously hoping that she'd ask me to play more G major chords. So I'm there playing with this thing. It was very difficult to get me to go back to school. I think it took my father had to come in and sort it out because.
And what was the music you were getting exposed to in that church? And I presume a musical family as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was mainly hymns, hymns, psalms, anthems, you name it. I mean, that was it. A very, 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 strong Anglican upbringing, basically, musical upbringing. For me, that was my foundation, my musical foundation, harmonic, everything. That kind of foundation for me was so important.
That led to you going to Cheetham School of Music in Manchester.
Yeah, Cheetham's was a very important step for me because, it was obviously music was the main emphasis of this school. I think it's fair to say that really, until I went to Chet's, I never really had organ lessons. I was just learned to play, totally by doing it. I was having piano lessons. That was a big start. I mean, there's no way that I could have played the organ if I wasn't a pianist. And I sort of figured that out too, quite early because, one needs to have a technical basis in which to be able to play the instrument. So that was quite straightforward. And then I went to the Royal College in 79 and studied both piano and organ. So, I mean, I entered the college actually as a pianist.
But that's the thing with you, because you do so much now on the piano. I wonder, I mean, are you an organist who plays the organ like a piano, or are you a pianist who plays the organ? I mean, there seems to be, you've got the two that have been a constant.
Well, as I said, I'm a pianist and I play the organ. Yeah, I mean, as an organist, I do play more or less like a pianist, yeah, because there's no way I could play the organ the way I do if I had not played the piano or studied the piano to the extent that I did.
And do you think, as a result, you play the organ differently? I mean, you have a different repertoire, which we can talk about in a minute, but do you think that particular route through the piano is giving you an edge when you sit down and play an organ?
Well, it does, because, having the technical ability to play the way I do, I mean, that's always been the thing. I've never really thought about it that way, but it's just that the only way that one can really play the organ well is to be a brilliant pianist. But that goes without saying. If you look at all the great organists before, people like George Thorburn Ball, who was a great organist, but also a fantastic pianist. I mean, he was playing things like Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto at the Royal College. I mean, I heard that story. And they'd say, yes, of course, well, but not many organists would be able to sit down and do that. I mean, Virgil Fox is another one, another great organist who was an amazing pianist. So the piano is the instrument. But
this is giving you a virtuosic, perhaps,
yes.
Look. When you mention people like Virgil Fox as an organist, that's the virtuosic end of the market, isn't it?
But it's all about being able to play and really to play brilliantly. I mean, it's a virtual. I mean, why should it be that the organist shouldn't have this same approach to playing? Because, I mean, it is a keyboard, right? So we have to have that technical versatility to be able to play and brilliantly and really amazingly. So this can only be done really by being a very good pianist.
When I look at you now, it's very much Gershwin, it's the jazz, you've got the blues, you've got more of a Broadway flavour to a lot of what you do. Where did that come in?
Well, this started really before Chet's. I mean, I heard a performance of the Gershwin Piano Concerto on the radio. I must have been about 8, I think. And, I'd never heard this kind of music before. So, it was, for me, it was a real ear opener, basically. And I remember hearing this concerto. I thought, my God, this is something, I really want, I want to play this piece, So, I mean, I remember my parents, I managed to persuade them to go and get the score. I mean, my music reading wasn't that hot at that time. But, I really wanted to learn this concerto, so I, was playing it, and not always by ear, but, I mean, I was just really, really trying to learn it. And then, of course, I really started to learn it then when I was at Chet's, and played it towards my end, for the end of my time.
You played Gershwin's Piano Concerto while
you
were at Chet's?
Yeah, I played it at Chet's, yes. We had a concert in Heaton Moor, I remember that. I mean, I've always had this interest in this American music, and it really started then. And I can also say that, I mean, every Saturday, of course, on BBC Two, there was always a big film, 3:00 on a Saturday, we used to watch that. And West Side Story was on one Saturday. I mean, I'd never heard anything like it. I mean, that was an amazing experience to hear that. So all this sound was of jazz, Bernstein, Gershwin, I was experiencing as a young boy. So,
but what did that give you? I mean, because it stayed with you. I mean, it's defined you really musically. What did that give you that perhaps you weren't getting from the traditional route that you were actually involved with in your studies?
I think probably a broader outlook, and certainly, to discover music which was, more rhythmic in style and harmonically more interesting. Different doors opened when I was probably about 16, 17, and, I heard some music of Stevie Wonder. Then I started to get into the 70s disco thing, with all this kind of music and Earth, Wind and Fire. And, this sound world fascinated me to an extent that I just wanted to go and buy all these albums and listen to it all. It was all a very, very interesting time. I mean, it's like being bombarded from all sides with different languages, and I just absorbed it all.
So why did you stick with the organ? Because, none of that has been written for the organ, but yet that's still your principal, or one of your principal outlets.
Yeah, well, I mean, the organ has always been a musical fascination for me, because that's what I started to hear when I was a young boy. I mean, I love the repertoire. I think that, the idea of me becoming a concert organist, I mean, this is we have to make this difference here, because, I mean, being a church organist is one thing, but being a concert organist, I suppose, didn't really occur to me until I went to Vienna in 1983.
So this was after you graduated?
So after I graduated, yeah. Because, I I was interested in being a cathedral organist. I mean, I was really interested in it. I mean, it was wonderful. Vienna was wonderful. I mean, I had a wonderful professor. We did a lot of things musically together, and it was a fascinating time. But in a way, it changed a little bit, because in 1987 I went to Glyndebourne Opera Company, and this is after I'd been in Vienna for 6 months.
I mean, this is a million miles away from...
Totally.
Really.
Well, basically, I mean, the whole Glyndebourne thing came up because my sister, in fact, asked me to go and play for an audition. They were looking for people to sing the chorus of Porgy and Bess. I mean, I sort of knew some of the main tunes from Porgy, so we went down. And I remember the audition because it was Simon Rattle and the general manager of the opera, and they took Melanie straight away. But they were also interested in me because they needed someone to play Jasper Brown, the onstage pianist at the very beginning of the opera, who's got this massive solo. And I remember, Simon came, gave me the music and said, "Look, so do you mind if you just take this and just look at it for half an hour, and then we'll hear you play it?" I said, "Yeah, sure." So, I gave the music and I looked at it. After half an hour, they came and I played it to them, and then they said, "Yes, I was the guy that's going to be doing Jasper Brown." And then they said, "How well do you know the opera?" I said, "Well, I don't really know it. I said, I know bits of it." So, it was a very interesting time, first of all, having to get the score and take it and go and learn it. The following year, then I was appointed assistant chorus master, imagine. And so I had, to learn other operas like, Traviata, the Ravel Double Bill, so I was very much involved in the operatic world. I mean, imagine, I never imagined this, and I was sort of conducting the chorus.
You must have enjoyed it, or was it just work and necessary?
Well, I did it. I did enjoy it, but I didn't really know, because I didn't speak any foreign languages. I mean, I didn't speak any Italian, French.
So how did you manage this? Why were you doing it?
The word I'm not going to use on this podcast, but you have to sort of just bluff your way through it. Right. You know what I mean? But it was a very interesting time. So what I really need to mention here, of course, is that during this time, the first year of Glyndebourne, which is 1986, Granada Television were actually making a documentary about me. And they were sort of following my progress around various things, but Glyndebourne was one aspect. And then Simon Rattle then was interviewed also for this documentary.
About you?
About me, yeah.
Simon Rattle was interviewed about you.
Was interviewed about me, can you imagine, yeah. And on this, at the end of this interview, he did say that he said, "I'll give you a bet that in 10 years' time, Wayne Marshall will be a conductor." Wow. I mean, I had no interest in conducting.
None at all?
No, I had no idea really about conducting, really. I had no inklings to become a conductor.
What do you think he saw in you then to make that kind of prophecy?
I think it was about the way that I play the piano, because my way of playing these operatic, Porgy and Bess is always about the orchestra. How is the orchestra sounding? All of these things. And it's not just playing a piano part, it's recreating the feel of the orchestra. That was my main thing as a repetiteur, was to recreate that sound, And what I should say, of course, at this point is that at school I played violin, cello and double bass.
Oh my goodness, right.
And I was also drafted into the orchestra as a timpanist.
So you're a one-man band.
So I was like a one-man band.
A lot.
So I mean, all this is all very it's all kind of subconscious, because I was watching and obviously learning, but not thinking that I would be doing the same thing years later. It just didn't even occur. But you know how it is. You learn by watching, don't you?
But then where was the organ in all of this? Because this sounds like a full-time distraction, because at some point you were the organist in residence at what was then the new Bridgewater Hall in Manchester, and a very significant commission of a brand new, it was Marcusson organ, wasn't it, in Manchester. What happened all over there?
I mean, the thing is that, I was always playing the organ. So that was never going to go, and I sort of built myself a niche in a way that I was really interested in the French Romantic repertoire and all of that kind of stuff, and improvisation. So this is my main thing as an organist. I always wanted to, and I was always trying to look for different repertoire, not to be playing the same kind of stuff that everybody else was playing, but different things. Transcriptions as well came into it at a certain time. So the Bridgewater Hall, when that was finally finished building in '96, I was asked to be what they called it then was the organist in residence, and it was wonderful. I mean, I had a wonderful time being there and sort of in charge of the organ. Yes, I mean, I was responsible for the concerts, the organ concerts. But as I said, what it's like with these sort of positions. The interest is full on. For the first year, then it starts to taper off. But I sort of made it a kind of thing that my concerts, I tried to choose a repertoire which was always very interesting, and I always interacted with the audience, that kind of thing.
I mean, was that a good platform for you to develop your own style or to introduce new things? I mean, was it a useful job for you in that respect?
Very much. I mean, I never really just looked at it as a job. It was a real honour to me to have a footprint in the north, where I grew up. But of course, then COVID hit, and then everything sort of just went pear-shaped, because there'll be a lot of the people left. So I've not really been back there, although I still, there's been no official goodbye or, hello. There's just been nothing. It's just sort of tapered off. But it was wonderful because, as I said, being in my sort of local playground, basically, I mean, the concerts were always well attended. It was just great to be associated there.
You were talking about you having a niche style. Are you perhaps getting more niche now in terms of being very specific in the repertoire you do, both as a conductor, a pianist and an organist? Are you lucky now that actually the concerts you're doing around the world are very much what you want to do musically? And I think at that Gershwin, at that Broadway, the American style of music.
I mean, I enjoy all the American style of music, but I mean, I'm not just a conductor of American music. I mean, I conduct a lot of different repertoire as well, mainstream repertoire. Although American music for me is mainstream repertoire. It's just that I've become a little bit more notorious, I think, for this kind of repertoire. It is wonderful that being a musician, I'm able to play the piano, play the organ and conduct. And it's nice when I can actually do all three in the same concert.
How does that go down? I mean, how do the orchestras come like, oh my goodness, now where is he? So you're on the podium and then you're behind them on the organ and then you come down and lead them from the piano. I mean, that's unique.
It is, well, in one way.
Do the orchestras like it? Or?
Yeah, they do. I mean, I think, it's I suppose it's fascinating. I mean, for me, it's just normal. It's what I do, Whether the orchestras think it's, it's fascinating or whatever, but, the fact is that, I'm up there conducting and then I'm playing and as a soloist, or I'm playing and conducting. For me, it's what I enjoy to do. And I mean, I've never actually formally studied conducting, not intentionally, but I think it's just the way that my career has sort of panned out, in that I was kind of thrust into these situations and just had to deal with it.
But does that give you a distinctive edge? Because I've heard you talk a lot about when you're rehearsing with an orchestra, you want them to feel the music as opposed to just what's on the score. And I think I'm right in saying that you prefer to take a lot more time with them rather than just do the 3 hours on the day and then the concert that evening. Oh. You're actually, in terms of getting them to feel the music, want to do it over a period of days.
Yeah, I like to rehearse, especially with jazz. I mean, the thing is that jazz, you can't really notate jazz, not really on the page. I mean, it has to be notated in a way that people can read it and play it. But what is most important about jazz is the feel, and that's what's not written in the score. Mm. So as a conductor, that's what I really enjoy, is to be able to rehearse with the orchestra and to show them how to feel it. And a lot of the time it's about, getting them to understand that some notes are not played for the full length, maybe they have to be short or longer. and with this jazz style, and all sorts of things and different things.
And is that key to your improvising? Because would I be right in thinking that your improvising is not the traditional French cochero style?
Oh, no.
You are the Duke Ellington Gershwin end of market there. Again, unique to you, is that right?
Well, we all have to have our own unique styles, when it comes to improvisation. I mean, I don't copy anybody. I mean, this is the thing that's...
But a jazz style,
but mine is
classical pipe organ,
a lot of
That's
mine
different.
is jazz based. That's where I'm coming from. I mean, yes, I'm a classical musician, but a lot of my improvisations are kind of more in the jazz style, certainly harmonically. And I think that this is what I enjoy, to bring this kind of aspect into it.
And does that work on I mean, obviously it does, but do you think, because you can do it on the piano very differently, but yet does that work on a mechanical European style concert hall organ?
Yes, it does. Looking at your face there, yeah. No, I mean, I make it because that's how I like to do it. I mean, I just, as I said, I can improvise in a very classical way. Yes, of course, but what we have to be careful here is that the harmonic language that I use is a lot of jazz, jazz chords and things like this. You can use this. I just enjoy that aspect of being able to bring that into improvisation a lot.
Does that give you a freedom when you're playing more mainstream traditional repertoire?
Absolutely.
So you're using a bit of, I don't know, would you call it liberality, perhaps, of a jazz performance into
absolutely
Bach or Mendelssohn?
It's all there as well, yeah. I mean, I have my own style of playing, yes, it's true. But I don't want to try to set out to be sounding like anybody else. I want to have my own style. So I feel, because of my technical thing, it's about having the freedom to be able to do that. There's a kind of freedom which I enjoy, because I can do that. I'm not bound by the fact that, some technical thing that's maybe I can't do it, but I'm lucky that I can.
Do you think sometimes you might be, although you have a big international career, do you think you're slightly on the outside of being, the concert musician influenced by disco and Stevie Wonder coming from the church?
Maybe, but for me, I'm just enjoying what I do, and that's the most important thing, is to enjoy what you do. And yes, I have been lucky in that I've been able to steer my career in the way that I do things that I enjoy to do. But, a lot of people have not really had this situation. They have to do what they have to do because that's what they have to do. But the whole point is that as a performer, I just enjoy to give what I really can give, and that giving my best of what I really enjoy to do. A lot of it is because I always knew what I wanted to do when I was 3 years old, and it hasn't changed.
Wayne Marshall, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, that's all for now. Next time, I go behind the scenes of BBC Radio 3's Choral Evensong at a live broadcast from King's College, Cambridge. So until then, from me, Mark O'Brien, goodbye.